Hi there, my name is Jared Smith.
I'm Derek Delfino.
I'm Mark Reza.
For this project, we have chosen to analyze the yearly NCAA basketball tournament, which features both a tournament for men and women, commonly known as March Madness. In this single elimination tournament, the nation's best collegiate teams compete at various arenas. The rights to televise sports tournaments are often bought out by various broadcasting studios. The amount paid for the rights is based off an estimated return on revenues. The rights to televise the men's NCAA tournament was purchased by Turner Media, a Times New Warner company, and CBS Sports for a whopping $800 million. On the other hand, exclusive rights to broadcast the women's NCAA tournament was purchased by ESPN for only $36 million. This values the men's tournament as 22 times more than the women's. By now, you have seen and heard us refer to the NCAA basketball tournament and the women's NCAA basketball tournament. This is how the media represents each tournament through a concept known as gender marking. Gender marking can be defined as referring to the men's event as the events and the women's events as the women's events. This idea of gender marking is rooted in an orthodox gender ideology where men's sports are male-dominated, meaning that the ability to perform adequately in sports are associated with manhood and men. So to be qualified, you must possess masculine characteristics. Male-identified, meaning that sports are considered a man's world, and therefore any women's sports should be noted as such. And male-centered, meaning men's sports are the expected focus of attention, leading to few women's sports being represented in the media. These are just a few of the reasons why the media has deemed it necessary to identify the women's tournaments explicitly, because it is assumed by society otherwise if you do not.
The vast difference in reward for winning tournament games between the men's tournament and the women's tournament is truly shocking. During the men's tournament, the NCAA pays the winning team's conference $266,183 for each game won. If a single team ends up going to the finals, the team's conference earns just under $1.6 million for that year and $1.6 million for each of the following years, totaling in about $9.6 million for the conference. The conference then allocates that money to each school's athletics programs accordingly. Conversely, if a women's basketball team wins every single tournament game and even wins the finals, they receive no compensation whatsoever for their wins. This imbalance of compensation has led to the extreme discrepancies in the funding that the men and women's athletic programs receive across the country in collegiate sports. In 1972, U.S. Congress passed a bill that declared that no person in the U.S. should be excluded from participation in, be denied benefits of, or be subjected to any discrimination on the basis of sex in any publicly funded program. This was a large step in the right direction that has led to an immense increase in participation of girls and women in sports and has discredited the long-held idea of essentialism, which conveys that boys and men are just naturally more interested in sports. This led to many women turning away from the idea of emphasized femininity that society values and focusing on building a physical strength and competence. However, even after 47 years of the law being passed and women representing 43.4% of all collegiate athletes, the differences in funding received for athletic programs is egregious. In women's college basketball, the programs receive 31.6% as much travel money as men, 29.1% as much recruiting resource as men, 21.6% as much equipment and supplies as men, and 16% as much overall operating expenses as men. The large gap is the direct effect of the lack of compensation for winning programs, and to achieve change, we need to start there. There are two main ways that media reaches sports consumers: print media and electronic media. Print media refers to the newspapers like USA Today, magazines like Sports Illustrated, and books, events programs, and trading cards. Electronic media refers to radio stations like Fox Sports Radio, television like ESPN, and film. However, with the introduction of the internet, the two forms of sports media have seemed to collide. Media and broadcast studios that choose to cover and analyze sporting events usually have 5 goals in mind. 1. Make financial profits. 2. Influence cultural values in social organizations. 3. Provide a public service. 4. Enhance personal status and reputation. And 5. Express themselves creatively or politically. Due to the media in the U.S. being privately owned, the dominant goals are profit and influencing cultural value in sports organizations. The people, usually men in positions of power, want to make sure that they stay in power and will cover what they believe will achieve that. Because sports are closely linked with orthodox forms of masculinity, one way they attempt to do this is by perpetuating the ideology that sports are male-dominated, male-identified, and male-centered. The media wants to portray that sports are male-dominated and the ability and performance are associated with only masculine traits. They also want to show that sports are male-identified and sports are only a male world. Lastly, the media wants to convey that sports are male-centered and the lives of men are the focus, which is why few women are ever represented. This is clearly evident in the coverage of both the men's and women's March Madness tournaments, and it can be seen by reviewing the various media platforms. The large media and broadcast studios know that sports is a male-dominated social world and wish to continue that to help their own profits. The ESPN.com homepage, an electronic media source, is the hub for all things sports and is used by countless users every day to consume their sports. However, there is a notable discrepancy in the number of stories covered for men and women. During the March Madness tournaments, 33% of the homepage stories and only 12% of featured stories were focused on the women. Even though ESPN owns the TV rights to the women's tournament, they still choose to cover the men's tournament over making more of a profit. NCAA.com, another electronic media source, represents all collegiate sports and covers any sporting event that is played under their name. However, during the NCAA basketball tournaments, only 18% of the headlines were that of the women's tournament, even though there are the same number of games held in each tournament. In addition to ESPN.com being the centerpiece for online sports, the television show that analyzes all things sports is also the main landing spot for TV sports consumers. During the tournament, ESPN only allocated 37.5% of the segmented mentions to the women's tournament, and some of these mentions were only promotions that the semifinals of the tournament were being held on ESPN stations. USA Today newspaper, a true print media source, found that of the 21,069 square inches dedicated to the men's and women's tournaments in their newspaper, there was a vast difference in the amount of coverage allocated to each tournament play. In regards to bracket analysis, Sweet 16 and Elite 8, and Final Four and championships, the women's tournament in all 3 areas only accounted for 24.4%, 14.6%, and 25.2%, respectively. All other newspaper space was dedicated to the 2 tournaments was given to the writers covering the men's tournament.
In conclusion, we would like to leave you with some questions to ponder regarding collegiate sports programs.
If the TV station were to give equal broadcast coverage to women's and men's March Madness tournaments, would there still be a difference in revenue earned by each respective college basketball program?
Question 2. If more women held positions of power in the NCAA, would that increase the amount of coverage given to the women's tournament?
3. Within your own college, do women's and men's sports share the same amount of resources and access to facilities? If not, how could you help achieve equality in women and men's athletic programs at your school?